That model still has value, but it is no longer sufficient in a league where defenses have evolved specifically to dismantle it. Pass rushes today are more creative, more coordinated, and faster than they've ever been in NFL history. Defensive coordinators are disguising coverages and rotating between looks at a pace that makes pre-snap reads less reliable than they used to be. Blocking schemes are breaking down more often because the athletes attacking them are more skilled and more numerous than the systems were originally designed to handle. The quarterbacks who are currently winning championships share something beyond arm talent. They can feel pressure before it fully develops. They can move their feet faster than the defense can react to their new positioning within the pocket. They can extend plays that should have ended as sacks into completions that move the chains. Patrick Mahomes doesn't win 3 Super Bowls without that ability. Josh Allen doesn't evolve from a raw project into a perennial MVP candidate without developing it. Lamar Jackson's entire identity as a player is built on it. So picture Shedeur Sanders sitting down during the offseason and watching his own rookie film. What he saw in that footage was a version of himself who possessed genuine arm talent but wasn't yet explosive enough to consistently perform the pocket movement and play extension that separate good quarterbacks from the ones who lead their teams deep into January. He saw moments where a tenth of a second more first-step suddenness would have allowed him to escape a collapsing pocket before the sack arrived. He saw plays where slightly greater lateral quickness would have let him reset his platform and deliver an accurate throw instead of scrambling for a 2-yard gain or throwing the ball away. He recognized the gap between the player he was and the player he needed to become. And rather than waiting for someone else to solve it for him, he found the exact training program that directly addresses it. That matters more than most people realize. The majority of young players watch their own film, see their shortcomings, and immediately start explaining them away. They blame the offensive line, they blame the play calling, they blame the receivers for not getting open. The exceptional ones see those same shortcomings and treat them as problems that need to be solved individually. That training video showed a quarterback doing precisely the kind of work that top-tier NFL players do when nobody is watching. The kind of work that doesn't show up as a single spectacular play on a highlight reel, but instead manifests as a cumulative improvement across dozens of plays per game. A little more explosiveness here, a slightly quicker reset there. Pocket mobility that quietly changes outcomes on plays that never make the broadcast replay, but absolutely show up in the final score. And the timing of all of this matters enormously. Because what Shedeur was dealing with during his rookie season was not a situation that gave anyone a fair read on what he's actually capable of. That story deserves its own breakdown, and it starts with something that has been conveniently glossed over in nearly every discussion about this quarterback competition. Shedeur Sanders' first professional season wasn't just difficult in the way people typically describe rookie growing pains. He was surrounded by a specific and measurable structural failure that made almost every aspect of playing quarterback harder than it should have been for anyone at any experience level. Cleveland's offensive line in 2025 didn't just perform poorly, it was collapsing. And there's an important distinction between those two descriptions when you're trying to evaluate what a quarterback's performance actually tells you about his talent and potential. A bad offensive line creates inconsistency. Some games are better than others. The quarterback has a decent number of snaps where the protection holds long enough for him to operate. But a collapsing offensive line is something categorically different. It's a unit where multiple positions are failing at the same time, where the breakdowns aren't occasional, they're structural, where a quarterback can't trust the protection on any given play and has to operate with the constant awareness that his pocket is likely to fall apart before his routes have time to develop. That second description is exactly what Sanders was working behind. And if you want proof of how the front office evaluated that unit in hindsight, the answer is written in the roster moves. The Browns didn't make a few tweaks. They didn't shuffle a couple of starters around. They lost or released nearly every significant contributor from that offensive line in a single offseason. Joel Bitonio, the longest tenured Brown on the roster, retired. Wyatt Teller, Ethan Posick, Jack Conklin, all gone. When an organization clears out an entire position group in one cycle, they're not making adjustments, they're acknowledging a catastrophic failure. Now, let's address the statistic that critics have used as their primary weapon against Sanders since the end of last season: his completion percentage, his interception numbers, the raw data that shows up in every debate as the supposedly definitive argument for why the rookie isn't ready.
Those numbers were bad. It's important to sit with that honestly, because everything else falls apart if you try to sugarcoat it. His completion percentage was 56.6. He threw 10 interceptions against 7 touchdowns in 8 appearances. That is the reality as it stands. But here is what those numbers actually capture when you strip away the narrative and look at the raw context. They show a 5th-round rookie quarterback operating behind pass protection that was failing him on a snap-by-snap basis, throwing to a receiver room that didn't have a single proven difference maker capable of consistently creating separation against legitimate NFL coverage, trying to execute an offensive system with zero margin for error because the structural support around him was actively disintegrating. Here's the exercise that every analyst throwing those numbers around should be required to complete before presenting them as a verdict on Sanders' talent. Go look at the rookie season stats of the quarterbacks who are currently considered the best in the league. Pull up their advanced metrics from year 1 when they were learning the position behind imperfect rosters in systems they hadn't fully mastered. The numbers are almost universally ugly, not because those players weren't talented, not because they weren't going to become the players they eventually became, but because the first year in the NFL is genuinely difficult under any circumstances, and it becomes exponentially harder when the offensive infrastructure surrounding you is fundamentally broken. Sanders' rookie numbers are a snapshot of a bad situation. They are not a prophecy about who he is as a passer when the circumstances change. And the circumstances are about to change in a way that is far more dramatic than most people have fully processed. There's a version of this offseason story where Cleveland looked at their quarterback room, made a few modest upgrades around the edges, and essentially told both quarterbacks to figure it out with mostly the same supporting cast. If that had happened, it would tell you something specific and somewhat troubling about how the front office actually views this competition. That is not what happened. What happened is something significantly more aggressive and significantly more revealing about where this organization's real priorities are aimed. The offensive line overhaul alone tells a story that's impossible to misread. Cleveland traded for Titus Howard, a former first-round pick who has built his career as a technically disciplined, reliable pass protector, the kind of lineman who never shows up in a highlight reel because he doesn't surrender the uncontested speed rushes that become viral sack compilations. In free agency, they committed tens of millions in guaranteed money to sign Elkton Jenkins, one of the most athletically gifted guards in the entire league, a player whose lateral quickness and movement ability are exactly what offensive line coaches value, because they directly translate to both run game success and pass protection versatility. They added Zion Johnson, another former first-round pick, on a 3-year deal worth nearly $50 million. That's real money for real starters, not veteran minimum experiments hoping someone surprises. And then came the move that made the front office's intentions unmistakable. With the 9th overall pick in the 2026 draft, Cleveland selected Spencer Fano out of Utah, an offensive tackle who didn't allow a single sack across 822 snaps during his final college season, not one. He also didn't allow a single quarterback hit. He won the Outland Trophy, the most prestigious individual award for an offensive lineman in college football. When Todd Monken was asked about the pick, he didn't hedge. He said Fano would play left tackle for them, and that he believed Fano would be elite wherever you put him on the line. A player of that caliber, selected that high, sends a message that cannot be misunderstood. This team is investing at the very top of the draft to build a protected environment for its quarterback. They didn't stop there. Later in the draft, they added Austin Barber, another tackle, in the 3rd round, and Parker Brailsford, a center, in the 5th round. There is now fierce competition at every position across the front 5. The entire unit has been demolished and reconstructed from the foundation up. The receiver room underwent its own transformation. Harold Fannin Jr., the tight end Cleveland drafted in the 3rd round of 2025 draft, emerged as one of the few genuine bright spots on last year's roster. 72 catches, 731 yards, 6 touchdowns. As a rookie, on a team that won 5 games. That kind of production from a young tight end on a struggling offense is the kind of thing that gets scouts and front offices genuinely excited, and it gave the Browns enough confidence to let veteran David Njoku walk in free agency.
But the real splash came in the draft. With the 24th overall pick, Cleveland selected Casey Concepcion, a dynamic playmaker out of Texas A&M, who projects as a true number 1 receiver. 15 picks later, they grabbed Denzel Boston out of Washington, a big-bodied, physical target that most analysts had graded as a first-round talent before he slid. It was the first time in the history of the Cleveland Browns franchise, dating back to 1950, that the team had selected 2 wide receivers in the top 40 picks of a single draft class. Both Concepcion and Boston have been turning heads in training camp, flashing exactly the kind of separation ability and contested catch skills that were completely absent from Cleveland's perimeter last season. Add Jerry Jeudy, who's still under contract and showed flashes of his own when the ball actually got to him. Add Isaiah Bond, a rookie from last year's class who showed promise. Stack all of that next to Fannin at tight end, and what you're looking at is a pass-catching group that is fundamentally, structurally different from the one Sanders was working with 12 months ago. Every analyst who holds up Sanders' rookie completion numbers is proof that he can't play should take a quiet moment to sit with this portion of a story. Teams don't build a fortress around a quarterback they've already decided to replace. Front offices don't invest first-round picks and tens of millions of dollars in guaranteed money to create the ideal environment for a veteran recovering from double Achilles surgery to try to recreate a version of himself from years ago. The investment is the most sincere statement this organization has made all offseason, and it points so loudly in one direction that you have to make a conscious decision to look away in order to pretend otherwise. What the coaching staff has been saying behind the scenes and increasingly in front of microphones deserves careful attention, because when coaches start speaking a certain way without being prompted, the people paying attention should listen closely. Todd Monken, who replaced Kevin Stefanski as head coach, has been anything but vague about what he's seeing from Sanders. During OTAs, Monken told reporters that Sanders has come miles in terms of his progressions, his ability to get the ball out, and his understanding of offensive concepts. He specifically noted that Sanders has become more decisive, making quicker decisions in ways that were simply absent during his rookie campaign. This wasn't a coach running through his standard media day routine of complimenting every player equally because the cameras were on. Monken was precise, he was specific, and he volunteered this information without being dragged into it by a leading question. GM Andrew Berry went even further. Speaking on Cleveland radio, Berry called Sanders' offseason development phenomenal. That is a word that front office executives almost never use in public when describing a second-year player. They know that every syllable gets dissected, replayed, and turned into a headline. The fact that Berry selected that particular word on his own initiative reveals something genuine about what the organization is witnessing behind closed doors. Sanders' improved processing speed, his enhanced ability to diagnose defensive coverages from the line of scrimmage, his capacity to recognize protection schemes developing before the snap rather than reacting to them after it.
These aren't cosmetic improvements. These are the foundational quarterback skills that separate players who merely survive in the NFL from those who thrive. And the fact that significant progress has been made in just one offseason should make anyone following this story reconsider who is truly trending in which direction. Now, fairness demands acknowledging the full picture. Anyone who pretends the other side of this competition doesn't exist isn't conducting an honest analysis. So let's talk about Deshaun Watson with the same directness that we've used for everything else. When Watson was at his peak, he was one of the most electrifying dual-threat quarterbacks the modern NFL has ever produced. What he accomplished in Houston was genuinely exceptional, not merely impressive, not noteworthy, truly exceptional in the ways that keep defensive coordinators awake on Saturday nights before facing him. The arm talent was real. The ability to sense pressure before it arrived was real. The improvisational creativity that allowed him to keep his eyes downfield while his legs bought extra seconds was real. He could throw from unconventional platforms and outside the pocket with remarkable accuracy. Nobody who watched him during that stretch in Houston can honestly claim they weren't witnessing a top-tier NFL quarterback performing at a level that only a handful of players are capable of reaching. But that peak didn't happen recently. That peak didn't happen in Cleveland, and between that high point and the present moment, a series of events has drastically altered what Deshaun Watson represents as a football player and what it truly means for an organization to bet on his return. The financial reality is impossible to ignore. Watson signed a $230 million fully guaranteed contract, every dollar guaranteed at signing. Cleveland also surrendered 3 first-round picks to acquire him from Houston. The total cost, draft capital included, altered the trajectory of this franchise for years in ways that are still being felt today. That contract was supposed to end the search. It was supposed to be the move that turned Cleveland into a legitimate championship contender. Everything was supposed to change.
Since arriving in Cleveland, Watson has appeared in 19 games across multiple seasons, 19 total games spread across what now amounts to years of absence, suspension, and injury. He tore his right Achilles tendon. He went through the grueling process of rehabilitating it. He came back. Then he tore the same Achilles tendon on the same leg again, requiring a second surgery and missing the entire 2025 season during yet another extended recovery. For a mobile quarterback whose value is tied not only to his arm, but to his ability to move, extend plays, and threaten defenses with the possibility of a scramble, a torn Achilles is already considered one of the most devastating injuries an athlete can suffer. A double tear on the same drive leg is the kind of medical history that forces even the most optimistic evaluator to question whether the player who returns can physically be the same player who existed before the damage accumulated. There were also the off-field issues that led to a lengthy suspension and organizational disruption, civil cases, an NFL investigation, missed time, missed reps, and the loss of continuity that quarterbacks need to establish rhythm with teammates and systems. Those specifics have been discussed extensively elsewhere, but their impact on Watson's ability to simply play football consistently in Cleveland was real, measurable, and significant. The version of Watson that Cleveland paid $230 million for was the Houston version, the one defenses were genuinely afraid of. Years, surgeries, absences, and a production record in Cleveland that never matched what the investment was supposed to deliver separate that version from the one currently trying to prove his legs still function after double Achilles reconstruction. Pretending those two versions of the player are the same isn't optimism, it's a decision to ignore the evidence. And the early returns from training camp have raised more questions than they've answered. On the very first day of padded practice, Watson threw 2 interceptions in team drills. He was placed on the physically unable to perform list at the start of camp. Reports indicate his reps are being managed carefully, and the coaching staff is slowly ramping him up rather than unleashing him. These are not the actions of an organization that is confident its veteran quarterback is fully healthy and ready to compete at the highest level. The evaluation timeline itself tells a story that almost nobody has fully broken down in public discourse, and it might be the single most important structural factor in determining how this entire competition gets resolved. because a close examination of that timeline reveals something that fundamentally changes who this process is designed to favor. According to reliable reporters covering the Browns, this competition will not be settled during the first week of camp. A few days of padded practice won't resolve it. There won't be a quiet meeting where Monken makes a private decision and the roster adjustments follow. Monken is expected to carry this evaluation well into training camp and through at least the first 2 preseason games, with both quarterbacks receiving starting opportunities. He indicated that the 3rd preseason game against New England on August 27th will likely determine who starts Week 1. Consider what that specific structure reveals. If a coach had already made his decision privately, there would be no reason to extend the evaluation into preseason games. Playing both quarterbacks in exhibition football when the outcome is already determined serves no organizational purpose. It only creates injury risk and media pressure. A coach who already knew the answer would have found a way to signal it through camp performance and moved on. That's not what Monken is doing. He wants to see live game snaps against real defenses, running real defensive schemes. He wants to see who can process information quickly when an opposing defensive coordinator is using disguised coverages and creative pressure packages to create confusion. He wants to see who delivers the ball accurately when a real pass rusher is generating real push and there's almost no margin for error. The requirement for live game evidence is an acknowledgement that everything that has happened so far, OTAs, minicamp, even padded camp sessions, doesn't fully answer the question he needs answered. Only real football can do that.
And this is the point where the timeline creates radically different circumstances for each candidate. Watson's biggest question mark in this competition isn't arm talent, it isn't football intelligence, it isn't system familiarity, it's physical durability under live contact following reconstructive surgery on the same Achilles tendon twice on the same leg. That question doesn't get answered in shells, it doesn't get answered in walkthroughs or 7-on-7 sessions or any non-contact environment. It only gets answered when Watson has to plant his drive foot firmly during a scramble, move laterally at full speed, or absorb a hit from a pass rusher who broke through cleanly. Every additional preseason snap is another opportunity to test that specific and critical unknown in increasingly realistic conditions. There are only 2 possible outcomes. Either Watson demonstrates that his body has fully recovered enough to withstand those physical demands, which would be genuinely impressive and would significantly strengthen his case, or the evaluation reveals limitations to that recovery that the medical staff likely already understands, even if they haven't stated it publicly. The longer the evaluation runs, the more times that question gets asked in situations with real consequences. Sanders' question marks are entirely different. They center on whether the development his coaches are describing is genuine and durable when the intensity of competition increases. And with every additional week of evaluation and every set of preseason reps, he gets another chance to provide evidence supporting what his coaches are already saying. Time is not a neutral variable in this competition. It is actively working in one direction. Ever since it became clear that both Watson and Sanders were entering a genuine battle for the starting job, speculations started circulating about the possibility of Cleveland trading Sanders if Watson emerged as the decisive winner. A young quarterback with Sanders' college pedigree and natural talent would command real value on the trade market, and teams desperate for quarterback solutions would presumably line up to acquire someone with his profile. On paper, the logic writes itself, but every time someone with actual access to the situation has addressed it directly, that narrative keeps running into a wall. Multiple reliable league insiders have explicitly slowed the trade talk down, and they've done so consistently enough across different outlets that it's difficult to dismiss as coordinated spin. The people closest to this situation are saying that both quarterbacks should be on the Cleveland roster when the regular season opens in September. That framing, coming from reporters who have clearly spoken to people with genuine insight into the front office's thinking, suggests that Cleveland either hasn't predetermined the outcome of the competition or has decided to keep both players regardless of who starts. Neither of those scenarios is consistent with the idea that Sanders gets shipped out the moment Watson has a productive practice week. That said, intellectual honesty requires acknowledging a caveat. Several sources suggest that while Cleveland's default position is to keep both quarterbacks, the front office wouldn't reject a trade if the offer were extraordinary and Watson emerged as the clear, undeniable winner. One insider used language suggesting that every organization has a price, meaning a sufficiently massive offer would at least receive consideration. But having a price and actively shopping a player are two fundamentally different things, and the fact that the trade conversation has been largely shut down by those closest to the situation tells you that moving the young quarterback is not currently part of the plan, regardless of how the competition shakes out. The temperature inside the locker room is harder to measure without bias, but the signals that have come out publicly point in the same direction. One of Cleveland's rookie receivers, when asked directly about the competition, chose honesty over politics. He said he genuinely had no idea how it was going to end, and that watching it unfold every day was fascinating. That is not the language of someone witnessing a predetermined outcome playing out on a daily basis. That is someone watching a real competition where the result is legitimately unclear. ESPN's Field Yates, one of the more respected and knowledgeable voices covering the league, called this the most authentic quarterback competition in the NFL this offseason. Not the most intriguing narrative, not the most captivating storyline, the most authentic, meaning the one where the outcome is least influenced by factors other than actual on-field performance. His reasoning was sharp. In most quarterback competitions, even when a younger player outperforms the established veteran, teams tend to go with experience because it's the politically safer choice. Yates argued that Cleveland doesn't appear to have that luxury, and more importantly, doesn't appear to want it.
Let's step back for a moment and acknowledge the emotional weight that all of this carries. The Cleveland Browns have been searching for stability at the quarterback position for longer than many of their current fans have been alive. The list of names is long and painful. The former high draft picks who showed promise but couldn't sustain it, the experienced stopgaps who were supposed to bridge the gap, the big money acquisitions that were supposed to change everything, but instead added another chapter to a story nobody in Cleveland wanted to keep reading. The Watson deal was the biggest swing in franchise history. 3 first-round picks and $230 million fully guaranteed. It didn't deliver what it was supposed to, and now the franchise is standing at a crossroads that feels different from the ones that came before. Not because the choice is between two equally uncertain options, but because the contrast is unusually clean. On one side sits a veteran trying to recapture a version of himself that existed years ago and multiple surgeries ago, in a different city with a different supporting cast. On the other side sits a young player who is actively, measurably, and coach-verifiably improving with one of the most comprehensively rebuilt supporting casts this team has assembled in decades. That is the real question hanging over this franchise, and the answer is arriving very soon. Will the people making the decision have the courage to follow the evidence without being paralyzed by the size of the contract or the money already spent? Stack everything we've covered today side by side, and the picture that emerges is not ambiguous. It doesn't split evenly down the middle. It leans consistently and clearly in one direction. Shedeur Sanders spent this offseason doing targeted, elite-level speed and explosion work that directly addresses the specific physical limitations exposed during his rookie year. He is younger, he is healthier, he is demonstrably improving. His position coach is speaking in terms that go far beyond routine encouragement. His head coach described his development in language that executives and coaches almost never use publicly without genuine conviction behind it. The roster surrounding him has been completely rebuilt at a cost that organizations don't incur for quarterbacks they've already written off. First-round offensive linemen, tens of millions in guaranteed free agent contracts, back-to-back premium draft picks invested in the receiver room. On the other side, Deshaun Watson has appeared in 19 games across multiple seasons in Cleveland. He tore the same Achilles twice. His production here never matched the contract. His peak performance happened years ago in a different city with a different supporting cast. Physical durability under live contact remains the central question mark, and with every additional week of evaluation, that question gets tested in more demanding conditions. Shedeur Sanders should be the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns in Week 1, not because the underdog narrative is more compelling, not because youth automatically wins over experience, but because when you follow the evidence honestly, without letting narrative or noise distort the facts, all of it points in the same direction. The first padded practice is in the books, the preseason games are approaching faster than anyone anticipates, and the answers that have been building all offseason are about to arrive in a way that nobody will be able to ignore.